Welcome, Steve McConnell. It's a pleasure to have you here today. This is the first podcast I'm recording in 2026, so it's a pleasure to be doing it with you. I want to talk about a number of things, but I really want to focus our conversation on your most recent trip to the Himalaya to climb in the Khumbu Valley and talk about not just the climbing part of that trip, but this I think was a really meaningful trip for you and the team, and it had a big impact on people in Nepal. And so I want to make sure that we highlight that as well. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to join you. And it was an amazing trip. There's so much I can reflect on and appreciate, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we've been working together since 2020, so a long time. And along the way, you've climbed Rainier, Shuksan. This was your second trip to Nepal since we've been working together. You also attempted Vincent a couple of years ago. What was it about this trip back to Nepal that was special or meaningful for you, or what made you want to add it to your list of adventures?
This was my third trip to Nepal, and my last trip just a couple short years ago, I had my first encounter with COVID. So I had very much on my mind the motivation to return and follow through on what I'd set my sights on. That trip was pretty interesting. I had the opportunity to travel with a bunch of Everest climbers. One of my friends was going to do some acclimatization on Lobuche, and I thought, well, I'll join you. That'll be a good challenge in my progression. But returning to Nepal last year, just in the fall, was all about full circle to put that adventure back on track.
And so you climbed Lobuche, and your plan was to climb Island as well?
Correct. So we engaged in a 95-mile trek to the Gyokuri Lakes area and mountain and the Chola Pass and Lobuche, and ultimately all the way around to Island Peak. And my trip in terms of relating to Island Peak ended at the high camp there, where a bunch of us had succumbed after 18 days up in the Khumbu to various ailments.
Plus, it was really rough weather in the Khumbu this season. It seemed like there was a lot of snowfall and like a lot of things that kept climbers down low as opposed to being able to move up high when they wanted to.
Yeah, we had two storms. And part of the appeal of the fall was the predicted clear weather, maybe a little bit cooler, but good conditions. And as is often the case with climbing, you're met with challenges that maybe you would prefer not to have to deal with and yet again overcome. So in fact, we climbed Lobuche East during the storm, and excellent guiding that assessed the risk factors and made sense out of all of that. So it was perfectly appropriate, but also interesting to be climbing through the snowstorm.
Describe for people what that was like for you to be in the Himalaya and this big peak and knowing like we're going to have to do this in the middle of a snowstorm, not ideal conditions.
I think for me, once you're engaged in the endeavor, there's a real intense sense of focusing and staying on the mission, obviously trusting expert guides in their risk assessments, and just striving to be a good team member and live up to your own personal motivations and objectives that you've set for yourself, and not to back out.
Yeah. You had some pretty big objectives for this trip. You were traveling to Nepal to do more than just climb. I love obviously this combination of, doing something that you enjoy deeply that has deep meaning for you, but that also somehow benefits other people, particularly people in the region you're climbing with. So you partnered with Madison Mountaineering and put together a cleanup effort that was a little bit more than just cleaning up the mountain.
Yes. So thank you for bringing this up. I think I've been so privileged to adventure and travel the world over for a very long time. And as I've progressed in life, felt like, there was something more I should be exploring. And to put it broadly, it was to think deeply about, can I not only experience the world and experience the mountains and nature, but can I do it in a way where I can help give something back to the greater good? And of course, anyone who's done this kind of thing in other countries or abroad would probably appreciate how important it is to be humble about that.
Totally.
We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the solutions, but we have our resources, we have our motivations to make a difference. Working with Madison Mountaineering, who have perfected in many ways cleanup protocols, it was an opportunity for me to invest in that and participate in that and help advance mountain cleanup. And I think that's a particularly interesting seam in the environmental world, because there aren't many people up there high in the mountains who have the skills and the aptitude and the ability to do that. And it's needed. Yeah, it's a little bit about what I'm calling my IF initiative, a kind of nascent NGO, IF standing for Impact Futures. But when I think of if, it's like, well, if only we would, or if only we could, or if we would apply ourselves, then why not? So kind of having fun with that. But it was really neat to explore that. And I saw it as an experiment from the beginning to learn from and hopefully build upon.
Were there any surprises? Like going in, you had this idea of what you thought you would accomplish or the impact you hoped to have. Was there anything that surprised you that you didn't expect?
Having had enough experience in this realm, I've been involved in some other pretty substantive efforts to build housing for those in need and things like that. One has to approach it with a great deal of flexibility. And certainly anytime you're going to Nepal, that is an important overarching mindset. So, for example, the storms coming in were really going to wreak havoc with our ability to see waste and deal with that around the camps. But again, credit to our team. They were able to mobilize Sherpas ahead of the storms and get up ahead of the team and start to do that. So I think adaptability and being flexible were part of perhaps not a surprise, but not planned initially.
And it's always interesting when you're sort of faced with it. Like, I think you've adventured, as you said, and traveled all over the world. So you know the importance of flexibility. But sometimes when it's like, oh, I have to put that in practice today, right now, it can be a little bit daunting and difficult to do. I'm curious I think you have some stats, don't you, about like the poundage of.
Sure. So
yeah, why don't you
in
share
fact,
those?
these storms greatly impacted our total haul. So
Okay.
we ended up with close to 200 pounds of waste debris from the top of Gyokuri, which was, I think, just aesthetically an extraordinary experience, a
Beautiful.
peak experience, literally, but also a good amount of cleanup at the Logushe High Camp before the storms arrived. And with that, what I've put in motion because of these storms will allow for a whole nother round of effort under the leadership of Madison Mountaineering. And I can't say enough about that team and their ability to do this work. What's intended in the coming season is an effort on Amada Blanc
Great.
and to continue this IF initiative, if you will. Just coming back to Gyokuri, that was our first sort of summit. It's a hike up to about 17,500 feet on a steep face, but an absolutely epic summit with the cirque of mountains surrounding it that's hard to describe. But up there, inevitably, are prayer flags. Prayer flags, unfortunately, they're made out of nylon. And the nylon breaks down and actually creates microfibers that, again, you see these stats like there's particles on the tops of some of the highest mountains. Like, how did they get there? And unfortunately, they're never cleaned up. And there's just hundreds of pounds of this flag debris, which in some ways desecrates the beauty of the religion and the flags themselves. So our team pulled an enormous amount of that material off the top of that mountain. And it was a real privilege to be there with them. At the same time, the nimbleness and the adroit way that our Sherpas could run around those rocks on their tiptoes and with their knives, get all this debris and haul it down the mountain. It's just amazing.
And then I think the really special thing about this cleanup effort was that you then donated much of that debris to an artist.
Yeah. So I really saw sort of three key pillars of this initiative. One dealt with culture and awareness and community. And the portal for that was through this amazing organization, Sagamartha Next. Tommy Gustafson, one of the founders, and that organization, which is based above Namche Bazaar, is an extraordinary way to understand the impacts of pollution, the ways in which we can better be part of the solutions, but also the way in which that waste can be transformed. And so they have artist in residence programs. They take select amounts of waste and turn it into art. In fact, This
Right.
little yak over my shoulder was created from debris that Madison Mountaineering hauled off of Ama de Blanc on the
That's
upper
very
mountain.
cool.
So learning about that, learning about their program and their take back program, whereby climbers from Namche can take a bag of waste all the way down to Lukla, proper disposal, was one, an educative component. Another part of the initiative involved the education of Sherpas on leave no trace. That began in Kathmandu under the leadership of Therese Sylvester, our lead guide, and Ong Purba, our Sirdar. And so there were efforts to continue to educate Sherpa, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
And then finally, third was the tangible hands-on cleanup efforts that we did. And those select materials could be segregated for art projects as well as hauled off the mountain and channeled back through the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee.
Well, I really appreciate that you thought it all the way through. I think oftentimes there's criticism around, yeah, you took it off the mountain, but then what happens, right? It has to go someplace. And the fact that you, in conjunction with Garrett's team, were able to make sure that it was disposed of properly, and also that it was used for some good. Like the fact the adorable yak behind you is made out of climbing ropes, I think is really special.
Yeah, for sure.
What if people want to, I mean, not everyone's going to put together this detailed of as an initiative as you have, but if people are really moved by what you've done, is there, like, what are small things that other people can do
Yeah,
if they're traveling to the
yeah,
Khumbu to have some kind of impact?
yeah. Small things is the key and probably the most important notion in my mind. Any scale matters. Any scale matters. Simply to know that you can visit Sagarmatha next and you can participate in the Carry Me Back program in itself is a tangible, meaningful contribution to the greater good. And I think from there, in my mind, it begins with being humble about one's initiative, being flexible, being open-minded. For sure, to the degree you would partner with an organization, knowing those partners and understanding their values, their motives, their capabilities, and just taking a step to take a step. Circumstances were really good for me to bring this into the kind of adventure that I'm looking for, and the journey, much like a climbing journey, to keep expanding and keep stretching and keep learning. And so
Yeah.
it's opening kind of a whole new trajectory for that. And I've been thinking about that. In many ways, it's about expanding experiences to experience impact to the greater good. So I feel when we adventure, it's a very personal experience
Right.
climbing. It's been said, it's selfish. It's
Right.
just for you, and it's amazing to grow and learn that way. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, is that it? Or in your case, am I going to help young women find confidence through their ability to climb and lead and organize? And, or in my case, to say, what else can I do to expand my experience beyond what I'm getting? But never to be presumptuous about that, or, oh, okay, we did this thing. If it's fun to talk about from the standpoint of hopefully it might cause a light bulb to go off for someone else. But I feel very much feet on the ground. It's not
Yeah.
something I'm trying to say, oh, look at me, we did this thing.
And I think the presumptive comment is really important to underline, because I think I have certainly felt this, that I've traveled to another country and felt like, oh, if I just could give them what I have, their lives are going to somehow be enhanced or improved. And I find that we don't always have the best answer for a community that we're not a part of and intimately have intimate knowledge of.
Community piece is so important. I think through this initiative, it opens up exchange and connection and dialogue with Sherpas, with young porters, with a sense of deeper understanding of their life and their challenges and what they're proud of, and how you're meeting them somewhere that's healthy and appreciated. Again, it shifts the dynamic from, okay, I'm here, there's these amazing people, they're here, they're making this happen, we can't do this without them. But now I'm in some kind of relationship with them that's different than the climb itself. And that's pretty cool.
And I think it starts with what you said, which is just listening and being curious and not assuming that we have it all figured out and know everything. Did you get to see, or have you yet been able to see some of the debris that you deliver to Sagarmatha next turn into art, or that's still in process? Okay.
No, yeah, I think that'll find its way through. process by which ultimately those artists grab onto the materials they have in their workshop and build things,
Okay.
create things.
Very cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about the climb itself. And it might be worth, because I'm always humbled when I meet people like you, Steve, who've been in the Pacific Northwest for decades and been adventuring here. So sort of get to your most recent trip to Nepal, but maybe give us just the short version of your matriculation as a mountaineer and climber and mountain athlete.
All right. Well, we all have such a story, I suppose, but I've always loved the outdoors and hiking and backpacking and scrambling. But only when I moved to Seattle, some 30 years ago and began my professional life here, did I catch the vision of, wow, that big mountain called Mount Rainier that often I see on the horizon. It seems very strange to be here and not pay a visit to the top.
Totally.
And that thought was with me for a long time, but it was in 2015 that I went to a lecture at REI with Ed Viesters. And at the end of that talk, he dropped this little clue that he does some guiding and to follow up. And so, well, sure enough, I sent in my interest and one thing led to another. And I had the great privilege to climb Mount Rainier with Ed leading my rope. And it absolutely was the most challenging physical thing I'd ever done. I didn't have any training strategy other than trying to hike up steep mountains as hard as I could, but without any scientific thought behind that. And then that began a journey over the last decade plus of pursuing various mountains and climbing. I've actually climbed on Mount Rainier now 6 times.
Wow, congrats.
One time being blown back by a storm, but the 5 other times getting up to the top and experiencing that. But ultimately that led to looking abroad in places like Cotopaxi and Kilimanjaro and just what might be seen as kind of a normal progression. I've had some of my peak experiences actually in the Cascades and in the North Cascades and Mount Shuksan and the Fisher Chimneys route and Mount Baker and other places like that. And then ultimately in 2019 joined a trek to Everest Base Camp. And that really introduced me to the Himalayas and wow, okay, there's something there. And finally building enough confidence to say, okay, let's go try one of those mountains. That took me back to the target of Lobuche, which ultimately ended with COVID and brought me back just a few months ago for a successful climb of Lobuche East.
So I want to talk a little bit about preparation because that's sort of what brought you and I together many years ago and continue. And I'm very fortunate to continue to work with you and help you achieve your goals. So, and you live in Seattle. And so, not everyone has access as we do to steep mountainous terrain as you prepare. But I think one thing that's unique about how you prepare is that you do everything at home. You do most of what you do outside. You don't go to a formal gym for your training, which I think is important for people to realize that it's not necessary for you to go to a gym 3 days a week in order to prepare to climb big mountains. So maybe just walk us through generally what you do as you're getting ready for a big peak.
Yeah, happy to do that. And actually, just thinking back to meeting you, Garrett Madison introduced me to you prior to the vision to climb Mount Vincent and go down to Antarctica, which was an incredible experience. And like any climb full of lessons, we encountered significant storm. And I had the choice to either hang in there and spend more time or try to return to the practice that I'm engaged with. So it wasn't a successful summit, but boy, was it a successful experience on so many levels. And to prepare for that, I had the encouragement to talk to you, and that was just a welcomed opportunity. And so for the first time, I like to say scientific approach behind how I was training. And I think it's hard to overstate the importance of that to better understand the heart rate zones and the different types of fitness necessary to be an endurance athlete who can climb and climb well. So as far as the Northwest, I prefer the outdoors. I've belonged to clubs over the years and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just not my preference. And we're so spoiled, as you alluded to, what we have within 30, 40 minutes, an hour or two is hard to match in terms of sheer verticality and varied terrain and all of it. So I always feel like that's a little bit of my hidden advantage, but still there's a lot of other modes of fitness that need to happen. And we happen to have this wonderful breezeway that, given it's the Northwest, it can be raining or snowing and it's okay. I can still be out there doing my routine.
And I think it's great that you've adapted that. As I said, there's so many ways to prepare. And, we're fortunate that we live in a place where we can drive a short distance and be in the mountains, but not everyone has access to that. And so part of my job as a coach, and actually one of the fun parts, is to be able to be creative and adapt someone's routine for what they have access to. And I will say, I was thinking, so the weather here over the weekend was horrible. And I hiked up one of our, you'll know the cable line trail on Tiger Mountain, which is notoriously steep and muddy and awful. And I always remind myself that I'm actually fortunate to be able to do this, that most people, would gladly trade 3 hours on a treadmill on a Saturday for 3 hours actually being outside, even though it's muddy and rainy.
Yeah.
Not great.
Just thinking a little bit about training, I think it's probably different for everyone. I have found for myself, if I set a tough goal, even a goal that I'm a bit fearful of, it galvanizes my motivation. And the transparency of the training plan and knowing there's eyes on it further motivates me. As I like to joke here in my household, I just can't leave a goose egg on this day. I've got to be accountable to that. But the tough goal and scary goal gets me moving in the worst condition. And so that is a strategy for health in the kind of contemporary life that I lead, that week in and week out. That in itself is just as important to me as eventually getting to a place and experiencing an adventure and learning through that.
And I think there's a lot to be learned through the training process about resilience and even navigating boredom and things that are really transferable to what you'll experience on the mountain. And I think when we, in our training, circumvent that or try to ease that in some way, we're missing an opportunity to learn more than just preparing ourselves physically. We're also missing a chance to build some mental toughness at the same time. And maybe we can shift to mental resilience and strength for a minute, because I've been working for about a year and I'm ready to launch now a program for mountain athletes that's related to mindset and building mental resilience. And you were gracious enough to be one of the first people to test that program. So what were some big takeaways for you? And let me say, to me, this is all about the importance of not just preparing physically for something, but there's so many other facets of preparation that I think are key to having a good experience in the mountains. And a big one, I think, is just being ready mentally. So to me, that means understanding, first of all, what the endeavor you're about to take on and what the risks and challenges could be. But then once you know that, to build some tools that allow you to overcome those challenges and even others that you might not have thought of in a way that is still allows you to contribute positively to the team and move through those challenges with confidence and grace and in a supportive way. So putting you on the spot a little bit, but what were some things that you took away from that program that helped you on Lobuche? And I would say for me personally, those sort of mindset exercises really translate into other parts of my life. They're not just things that I use when I'm in the mountains, but use day to day in my business and in relationships.
I'm really glad we're chatting about this a bit. I think this is incredibly important and a really valuable aspect to the alpine athletics approach that you're developing. And I welcome the opportunity to look inward at the things that maybe can impede our success or impact or limit us in ways that we otherwise wouldn't be limited. So of course, there's the physical capability that we work on, but the reality is everyone's different, but these are scary places and bad things happen, and calibrating what is a perceived risk, what is an actual probability against, the ways in which we manage that risk and have clarity of thought and mindfulness about a mindset. I thought it was an extraordinary regime and would encourage any climber to take care with that. And it'll only broaden your own awareness of yourself, but also improve your performance on the mountain. In my case, I hold certain fears that I am aware of, but at the same time want to try to transcend and overcome. And there's always a moment where it seems on every mountain, and it seems that storms like to follow me around. I think it's the greater universe kind of making sure I get these lessons right. I remember being on Rainier a few short years ago and practically being blown over. It was so strong, and I'm a pretty big guy and holding boulders and thinking, well, let's just get out of here. My house is only a few hours away and that'll be good. But then persevering and being successful and actually having one of those magical sunset summits you could ever imagine. So on Lobuche, inevitably, you're working away and it's hard, and it's a pretty steep 20,000 foot mountain. And You're several hours into the upper mountain, and as we described, there's a bit of a storm and it's snowing, and there's inevitably a moment you kind of look up and you think, oh my God, that's steep, just like, wow, that snowfield, and little kind of voice like, maybe it's enough for today. I got to the top of Gyoko Ri, I'm happy. But the mindset work is at that crux moment, the thing that brings you back. And it's like, well, wait a minute. For me, I think of life experienced needing challenges, needing to overcome fears, needing to see what's beyond maybe too docile or too safe an experience. But then knowing that I've built a structure with top guides and amazing Sherpas and redundancy and the safety to say, come on, let's go. And I remember having that moment maybe 3/4 up the upper mountain, but it's probably less than a minute. Also, the lead guide, just so perceptive. In that moment, the voice was just like, you're climbing well. And
this was your voice, your internal voice.
No, his voice.
Okay.
Yeah, Teray. And that was enough. Like, all right, good. Let's just keep going here. So I think I would encourage anyone to put some care to the mindset work.
And it's so interesting how sometimes having that external motivation is really what we need in order to get through a difficult situation, which I think speaks to the importance of having good partners or good guides around us that have some intuition, that can see when someone needs just a little nudge in order to get them through whatever might be brewing mentally for them.
Yeah, for sure.
And Teray is great for sure. Sort of bringing it full circle and thinking about your recent efforts in Nepal, if somebody wants to do something similar, what advice would you give them? We talked about small things that people could do, but if someone wants to endeavor to change, to make a change or do something in a community that they care about, what do you think is important for them if they get started?
I like where we discussed that any scale matters, and a step to take a step is all it takes. And if one is contemplating, I'm going to take on this adventure, but I wish I could also contribute in some way. Well, if it's in Nepal, it's right there for you. The Sagamartha, the next carry me back program. It doesn't cost anything. It's well organized and it makes a difference. And so just that kind of participation. But from there, I think in these faraway places, you don't have bureaucratic barriers necessarily. You have probably more freedom than you realize to affect some kind of impact or connect with the community. And so I think one, any scale matters. Two, to the degree you're going to engage an organization, take care to learn about them, understand them. I've mentioned Sagamartha Next a couple times. Check out their website. It's a fantastic portal to the work they're doing. And I think a shining example of how you can engage.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can check it out as well. Well, what is next for you, Steve? You mentioned the importance, and I've certainly seen this as your coach, of having something out there on the horizon that's providing motivation today. So what are you looking at in the future?
It's interesting. I always find after a big climb or effort outdoors, it takes a little while, one, to process and think about, two, to rally motivation or commitment to what's next. But kind of in that process right now, having been back just since November. But I'm thinking about places like the European Alps as some place. I've done some scrambling and some self-guided climbs up steep trails and whatnot, but to, like a Mount Blanc, for example. And I'm thinking about the Sierra Nevada. So it's all brewing, but equally I'm thinking about where I take IF initiative next as well.
Great. I think to see you consider both aspects, like where can I continue to advance my skills or have the experiences that are important to me, and also impact in a positive way the community that I'm climbing in. I really encourage more people to think about it in those terms.
Maybe just digressing slightly on this idea of community, another aspect to this climb was I put a lot of effort into pulling together a group of friends who in their own ways are all busy and spread far and wide, and in some cases are quite accomplished climbers. But I think like anything, you get out of it what you put into it. And so to do that groundwork, and as we know, for any of us to say, okay, well, I'm going to open up 3+ weeks or 3.5 weeks, and I'm going to leave everything that's part of my normal routine, and I'm going to go hang out in Nepal. It takes a bit of effort to get that together. So it turned out that through that initiative, I was able to bring 5 friends together. And the community and the time together with that group of similarly motivated people is extraordinary. And every one of them was completely passionate and interested in the cleanup activities and
It's
wanting
great.
to participate in that. So it's just interesting to ponder the different types of communities. And when you think about, well, how do I engage in something or what do I do? Also, you don't have to do it alone.
In fact, I think it's more meaningful when you're having that shared experience with other
Exactly.
like-minded people, as you said. I think the ripple is bigger when there are more people who then, like your 5 friends, will go back and talk in their circles about the experience they just had in Nepal, and then it continues to grow from there. Well done, Steve. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Gosh, when I think about climbing, I think it's just a ball of yarn that we can tug on, for the entire day. I
Yeah.
know you had pondered, advice for others. And, my thoughts on that are probably pretty straightforward, but giving oneself time to train and have a
Mm-hmm.
really good ramp that
Mm-hmm.
is informed by a scientific method for endurance capability. We talked about the mindset work and investing in that. And I'm not someone who necessarily journals every day, but then when I'm looking at something like that and working with a really thoughtful coach like yourself, the time I spent writing about that, thinking about that, it's priceless. Prior experience, I think, we're all probably on some kind of progression. And so for me, getting to 20,000 foot mountain in the Himalayas was part of a progression that really began with mountains like Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, and some of the North Cascades, or a Kilimanjaro or a Cotopaxi. So I think the prior experience is important. Specifically, the fixed line practice, I think, is really important as well.
We
And
practiced that in a park in Seattle one day.
yeah, yeah. And especially descent techniques, the double grip or the hand wrap, these things. You just want to be really confident when you're staring down a couple thousand feet. It's just your hand wrap that's protecting you. But in fact, it's a very impressive way in which you can control yourself. So there's nothing to fear, but the practice, I think, is important. I think for me, being with really good guides, and of course that takes some resource, but being
Yeah,
with a Mountain Madness or being with a Madison Mountaineering, the risk mitigation is, I think, material.
absolutely.
And frankly, the experience itself is, I think, approached in a much more thoughtful way. And then interesting, is my third time spending several weeks in the Himalayas, but it's the first time I finally got comfortable with that buff over my face the whole time. And some little brain cell finally fired that, whatever discomfort you were sensing of not having your normal kind of open face is far less critical than just really being committed to staying
Staying
healthy
healthy.
and
Yeah,
managing that dust. And then it's like anything, after 3 or 4 days of full commitment, it doesn't really even bother you. Like now it's
right.
like, it feels odd not to have that, that buff covering your face. So there's a little tip as well.
That's a really good point. I think it's often the little things that make a big difference, and keeping your respiratory tract healthy when you're walking to base camp in Nepal is really paramount to having a good climb and being healthy the rest of the time. Well, those are great words of wisdom and tips. Thanks for sharing, Steve. It's been fun to have this conversation and kind of recap how things, not just your most recent climb, but kind of the progression and where you've been. And I look forward to helping you get ready for whatever's next and seeing that play out.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to
Yeah.
hang